Hey everyone, I'm your host Peter Zablocki, and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone is having a great day so far, and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on the show, and other information such as the list of our upcoming guests on the conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can find exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, in the final days of June 1826, two old men lay dying. One in Quincy, Massachusetts, and the other in Monticello, Virginia. Both were frail, bent with age, yet filled with stubborn pride that had defined their lives. One whispered, "Thomas Jefferson survives." But, unbeknownst to John Adams, Jefferson had already died a few hours earlier. The date was July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence had been adopted. The symmetry was uncanny, poetic even, or almost divine. The two men who had once stood shoulder to shoulder in forging a new nation, who had later turned bitter political rivals, and who finally reconciled in their twilight years, departed this world together, as if history itself demanded nothing less. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The relationship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson was one of the most extraordinary in American history. One of ideals and ego, ambition and bitterness, intellect and reconciliation. It began in the embers of revolution and ended in mutual respect, a friendship tested by politics and salvaged by the shared weight of legacy. Adams and Jefferson could not have been more different in temperament or background for that matter. Adams, a brash and pugnacious New Englander from modest Puritan lineage, believed in law, order, and the need for strong institutions. He was a man of explosive opinions, sometimes caustic, always energetic. Jefferson, by contrast, was the elegant Virginian planter philosopher, a soft-spoken idealist whose confidence in the innate goodness of man often clashed with Adams's more cynical realism. Where Adams saw chaos lurking beneath too much liberty, Jefferson feared tyranny behind every institution. Yet revolution has a way of forging strange partnerships, as was the case here. The friendship began in Philadelphia during the Continental Congress of 1775. Jefferson was the junior delegate from Virginia, tall and reserved, while Adams was already respected as one of the loudest voices advocating for independence. Adams would later admit that he admired Jefferson's writing far more than his oratory, and when the time came to draft a declaration announcing their break from Britain, Adams insisted that Jefferson take the lead. "You can write 10 times better than I can," Adams told him. Jefferson demurred, but the result, what Adams later called the Declaration of Independence, secured Jefferson's place in history and sealed their bond. During the years of war, Adams and Jefferson grew even closer. They both served as diplomats abroad, Adams in the Netherlands and France, while Jefferson in Paris. When Jefferson's wife Martha died in 1782, leaving him desolate and emotionally adrift, it was Abigail Adams who wrote him letters of comfort. The trio, John, Abigail, and Thomas, shared dinners, debates, and a vision of a republic built on Enlightenment ideals. In Europe, far from the partisan intrigues of home, their friendship deepened. They walked through the gardens of Versailles, discussed Roman philosophers, and toasted to liberty over French wine. They were brothers in revolution, you might say, thinkers of a new age. But as America entered its infancy, the seeds of their political division began to sprout. When George Washington became the first president in 1789, he appointed Jefferson as Secretary of State, and Adams became the vice president. Their once harmonious outlooks began to diverge shortly thereafter. Adams gravitated toward Alexander Hamilton's vision of a strong central government and financial institutions. Jefferson, however, feared monarchy in disguise. Adams believed in checks and balances to guard against anarchy. Jefferson championed the will of the people, even when it boiled over into chaos, as it did during the French Revolution. What had once been an intellectual difference of opinion now turned personal as they vied for power. In the presidential election of 1796, Adams and Jefferson became the first to face off in a contested national election. Adams won by a narrow margin, and Jefferson, a runner-up under the rules of the day, became his vice president. The situation was awkward to say the least. Jefferson, now sidelined, began to cultivate his own base of power, working behind the scenes to undercut Adams's administration, especially after the passage of the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts. Adams, feeling betrayed, saw Jefferson as disloyal and dangerous. Their once thriving correspondence went silent. In 1800, the rivalry reached its most vicious point. The campaign between Adams and Jefferson was one of the dirtiest in American history. Jefferson's supporters painted Adams as a monarch and a tyrant. Adams' allies accused Jefferson of atheism, cowardice, and having an illicit relationship with a slave, accusations that would follow Jefferson for the rest of his life. Adams lost the election, becoming the first president to be voted out of office. In one final gesture of bitterness, he left Washington in the early hours of March 4, 1801, refusing to attend Jefferson's inauguration. Over a decade, the two men did not speak one bit. Adams withdrew to Quincy, turning inward and nursing his wounds. Jefferson ruled from Monticello as his vision of a more democratic, agrarian republic took shape. They remained political symbols, Adams of federalism, Jefferson of republicanism. But time has a way of softening even the sharpest resentments. The credit for rekindling their friendship belongs in part to a man who was never president, Dr. Benjamin Rush. Rush, a fellow revolutionary and close friend of both men, believed that their story was incomplete without reconciliation. In 1809, he wrote to Adams, "Why should you and Mr. Jefferson pass into the silent grave without carrying with you a knowledge of the truth from each other's lips?" Adams, perhaps feeling a chill of old age, agreed. He took up his pen and on January 1st, 1812, wrote Jefferson a short, warm letter. Jefferson responded in kind, and thus began one of the most extraordinary correspondences in American history. From 1812 until their deaths in 1826, the two men exchanged over 150 letters. They wrote not just of politics, but of philosophy, science, family, religion, and the meaning of the American experiment. They complained about the partisan strife that had once divided them, and they reflected, sometimes with harsh honesty, on their achievements and failures. Their letters are filled with the eloquence of age and the candor of men who no longer had anything to prove. One of the most remarkable things about their correspondence was how little they avoided the contentious issues of the past. They did not pretend that their political feud had not occurred. Instead, they kind of dissected it. Adams confessed that the partisanship of the 1790s had blinded him. Jefferson admitted that some of his actions had been shaped by ambition. Yet, rather than reopen wounds, these confessions became bridges. In one letter, Jefferson marveled at the experiment they had helped launch. "I like the dreams of the future much better than the history of the past." Adams, always more skeptical, reminded him that dreams require discipline to endure. Still, the mutual respect was undeniable. In 1823, Adams wrote, "You and I ought not to die before we have explained ourselves to each other." By then, they had already done so, however, repeatedly and with grace. Their reconciliation was more than personal. It was symbolic. In a republic still struggling to define itself, their story demonstrated that bitter enemies could somehow find common ground. They became icons of the founding generation, not just for their contributions to independence, but for their example of humility and forgiveness. As the two aged, their letters turned increasingly reflective. They wrote of their children, their aches and pains, and the steady approach of death. Jefferson, plagued by debt and illness, remained stoic. Adams, ever the romantic pessimist, saw decline as both tragic and inevitable. Yet neither man lost faith in the American idea. By 1826, both men knew that their time was short. Jefferson, unable to rise from his bed, dictated his final letters with trembling hands. Adams, though nearly blind and hard of hearing, still took daily walks in the Massachusetts sun. They had made peace not just with each other, but with history. And so, full circle, on July 4th, the 50th anniversary of the American independence, Jefferson passed away in the early afternoon. Hours later, Adams, unaware of Jefferson's death, muttered his final words: "Thomas Jefferson survives." But it was not merely a factual error. It was a spiritual truth. Jefferson did survive in Adams, and Adams in Jefferson, if you want to get poetic. Their intertwined legacy endured in the very republic that they helped create. Thanks for listening.